We're joined by volleyball coach John Gump, and certainly Gumper, it's been an interesting 10 months or so for everybody. When you look at your program, what have you been able to do thus far with your student athletes?
It's, you hit it on the head. It's been a challenge. When this first started 10 months ago, I think we all sort of thought we'd be back to sort of normal by August, and then as that approached, it became pretty obvious that we certainly weren't going to start on time. I think one of the big challenges has been the constant change. Is, you have a plan for what you're going to do, and then as that plan approaches, circumstances don't allow that to happen, and you have to move on to another plan. And I think, that's been difficult, and it's certainly been a challenge for our players. Just constantly not knowing what's going to happen, and trying to make plans. We did have some opportunities in the fall to get in the gym for a couple of weeks. Probably the last 4 weeks of the semester, we were able to work in some small groups, and that was nice to just, even though it wasn't the full group and really limited in what you could do, it was just nice to be in our environment together, at least to a certain extent. But we're hopeful that as we get into the spring that we'll start to be able to move back towards a little bit more of a normal experience.
When you talk about the spring and hopefully normal, what are some of the things you'd like to accomplish in the second semester?
The biggest thing that I would like to do right now, the plan is for us to get started around the beginning of March and have the opportunity to do about 6 or 8 weeks of practice that sort of is closer to what we would normally do, but also the opportunity to maybe have a couple of competitions. And my hope is that we can get a couple of competitions scheduled to give our seniors an opportunity to get on the floor one last time and get some small degree of closure to their career, the opportunity to put their uniform on one last time, to be together as a group. We have 6 seniors who are going to be graduating in May. And so even though the NCAA has given the opportunity for an additional year of eligibility, life moves on. And so their plans are not to stick around and come back for the fall. And that's, completely understandable. So we're hoping that we can get this opportunity to get them on the floor as a group and get some sort of recognition for them and just some small degree of closure. Certainly it won't be anything close to the experience that we had hoped to be able to give them for their senior year. But, as we've talked about with our kids, it's not what we wanted, but it's what's available to us. So let's, try to make the best of what we can with what we have.
Even though the fall was different, John, with no competitions, what did you notice about your women when they took the court, even to practice for a few weeks?
Well, the first thing was they were just so thrilled to be doing what in other circumstances might be considered really mundane, because we were limited. We couldn't be competitive at the net. We couldn't go a full 6-on-6 or any of that kind of stuff. So you were really limited to a lot of basic skill work and breaking things down and working on footwork patterns and those kind of things that aren't always a lot of fun to do. They're necessary, but they're not always a lot of fun. But having not had the opportunity to be in the gym, for us, it had been, we usually start our spring practice after we return from spring break. And, we never came back from spring break last March. So, we hadn't been together in the gym since the fall of 2019, since November of 2019. So for them to get back after about 10 months of not being in the gym, they were just thrilled to be able to do anything.
John, you've had experience at the Division III level at Allentown College / now DeSales University. You coached at Lehigh at the Division I level. So you've been at 3, 2, and 1. What are some of the different challenges at each level in terms of coaching volleyball?
Well, when I started at Allentown, the challenge was, finding enough kids to put a team on the floor. I mean, there were a couple seasons where it was 7 kids. The decision-making from a coaching standpoint is pretty easy. And there's not a whole lot of challenges about playing time, but you're limited in a lot of other ways. And then at Lehigh, the challenge was trying to manage a national recruiting. That was the biggest challenge. You're trying to recruit nationally, and that can be a challenge. That's one of the reasons why Kutztown is such a great place to coach, because you've got that competitive environment of the higher level, particularly in the PSAC, where you've got to be prepared to compete. You're going to be challenged every night in and out, but at the same time, you're also not trying, because of the kind of school that Kutztown is, you're not trying to do a whole lot of national recruiting. So to me, it's sort of the best of both worlds. It's a really competitive environment, but some of the other stuff that you need to do is a little bit more manageable.
What I didn't know about you until I read your full bio is that you were also the sports information director for a time at Allentown. You basically had 2 full-time jobs at once. How difficult was it juggling that?
Well, my first year, I was also the assistant softball coach, which was interesting. To be honest, the only sign that I knew was this one, telling the third base coach to run him again and hope the kid would get it the second time, because I didn't know him either. It was challenging because at times you were busier in what was your off season than you were during your season, because at that time our basketball teams didn't play double headers. So there were often weeks where you would have 4 nights of basketball. That changed a little bit in the subsequent years when we started playing some double headers. But it made for long days. At times. But the other side was, I got to know athletes in other programs that I probably wouldn't have if I had just been coaching. And that was, a lot of fun, was to really get to build relationships with kids from other teams, not just the 10, 12, or 15 kids that were in my gym every day.
You're a Syracuse grad. And
Right.
I spent a month there 1 week in December where it snowed every single day. What was the experience like for you as an undergrad in upstate New York?
Winter's relentless up there. I don't remember there being a whole lot of really huge snowstorms. It was just the constant. It was 2 inches on Monday and 3 inches on Tuesday and 2 inches again on Wednesday. I always tell people it's like, you get up every morning, and somebody punches you in the face, and then you go, well, at least that's over with, and now I can go on with my day. But we used to describe, what day is summer this year? It was just, and it was the length too. You had to be prepared for winter weather from the middle of October to the middle of April. And that's, just the way it was.
You and I share public address announcing duties for some sports at Kutztown, mostly basketball. How much do you enjoy doing something like that?
I love it for the same reason that I like being sports information director. It's an opportunity to interact with some athletes in other programs, and get to know kids in a little different level. I see we've been joined here by that's Winifred. She's certainly not shy about making herself known. But I get an opportunity to get to know some players from other teams. And I've, developed some relationships with some kids from basketball teams that continue to this day. I still get a Christmas card every year from Meredith Starr, who, was on the women's basketball team probably much longer ago than I want to remember. But that's one of the really fun things. Plus, you get a great seat to watch basketball, which can't be beat.
You also spend some time in the summers working in the press box at First Energy Stadium during Reading Fight and Phil's games, and you keep everybody kind of loose and have a good time there. It just seems like sports overall is something that's a huge part of you.
Yeah, I grew up as in a house where sports were a big thing, and baseball, played baseball from the time I was eligible to play in Little League till the cheaters start throwing curveballs. And that kind of ended my baseball career. Played basketball very unsuccessfully for a period of time, and then found volleyball. Around the time I hit junior high, and and that kind of took over. But I've always been a huge sports fan. So the opportunity to kind of be a part of it at some level, particularly you growing up as a Phillies fan, to be in Reading and have the opportunity to see guys as they're moving through, and then you watch them eventually when they get to the major league level and say, yeah, I remember when he was in Reading.
What led you though to coach volleyball eventually?
I just gotten out of college. I was working, and I ran into my old high school coach, and he had just taken the job at Allentown, and he actually was hoping to hire my sister because he wanted a female to be his assistant, and she wasn't able to do it. So he asked me if I'd be interested, and I said sure, because it was a way to stay around the game. And then he decided after a year he didn't want to do it anymore, and they hired me at 22 to be a head college coach, and that developed into the opportunity to become the sports information director there a few years later and do it as a full-time job. And here we are, however many 30-some years later. And I still enjoy it just as much as when I started.
It seems like the game can be pretty specialized, where not all the players are going through every rotation on the court. Has the game changed a lot in those 30 years?
It has. I mean, it's tremendous. I mean, one of the biggest changes is the introduction of the libero, which is really a specialized defensive player. But ball handling rules have changed a great deal. They've loosened up a lot, which at the time it changed. Sometimes you feel like, am I really in favor of this? It's going to water down the game. But what it's done, it's kept the ball in play. And that's been the biggest change, is most of the rule changes have been designed to try to keep the ball in play. And that's, I think that makes the game more exciting. I'd rather see the ball stay in play and players determine when the rally ends than have it to be determined by a referee's whistle because of some violation.
I guess with 7 players, though, you didn't have to worry about specialization a whole lot, did you?
There was one kid who subbed, and it made it really easy to keep track of.
Tell me about the trip you just made with your son recently.
He is doing a leadership program out at a church in Los Angeles, and he was home for Christmas, primarily, I think, to see his family, but also to get his car. To go back, Los Angeles is a challenging place to live without access to a vehicle. So on the 28th, we decided to drive. We drove back to Los Angeles to get his car, and it was an interesting trip given the circumstances. Our goal was really to drive almost 3,000 miles and interact with as few people as possible, and we were able to kind of accomplish that. Although we were in Carson, Illinois, we were struck by a sign for the world's largest rocking chair, and we did have to get off the interstate to see that. And that was outside, so we could socially distance, and but that led us to the world's largest wind chime and the world's largest golf tee as well. We did not see the world's largest mailbox, which later we found was disappointing because apparently you can walk into it. So Matthew was a little disappointed that we didn't get to see that, but maybe another time.
Sounds like a great trip, that is, for sure. And Matthew's helped on your staff at time. What's that been like for you?
It's been strange to not have him because, from the time he was small, I mean, he grew up basically on Kutztown's campus and in Keystone Hall. And he's been around my program in one way or another since he was little. And certainly the last few years as part of the staff, he was a really big part. So it's been strange to not have him around. He still follows and, tries to watch matches, in live stream and that kind of stuff when he can. But it's been a change.
You've had some great success at Kutztown. You've been there 24 years, and I don't want to ask you to pick your favorite moment or your favorite player because that can be tough and not fair, but I do want to bring up a particular player. You're All-American in 2006, and Sarah Brandon. What type of player was she?
Sarah was just dominant. I mean, that's the word that always comes to mind. She was the kind of player who could put the ball on the floor when everybody in the gym knew she was getting the ball. And that's kind of what separated Sarah from most players that we've had is you didn't really need to design a lot of trickery for her. You just needed to get her the ball, and her, her natural ability just took over.
How much fun are you having? It seems like I mean, I know your personality. I know you have a great sense of humor, but do you still enjoy doing all this?
Yeah, and it's been these last few months. You've sort of been challenged to try to find new ways to do some things, and some of the things I think have been good. I'm hopeful that high schools have done a great job of making their events available via the web because of the limits on people watching. And it's allowed us from a recruiting standpoint to see a lot more kids. I saw more high school matches last fall in, 2 or 3 months than I've seen probably in the last 30 years because you just don't have the ability, when our season's going on to get out and see high school matches. But there'd be nights I'd be sitting in this chair with my laptop open, iPad open, and another on the YouTube app on my TV, watching 3 matches at a time. So I'm hopeful that will continue because that's been a really nice addition to what we do. I've had to try to develop some ways to use video and other things a little bit more creatively to get things to our players. That will be beneficial. But I also looking forward to just getting back to a normal schedule where we go in the gym every day and our whole group is together and life gets back to as close to normal as possible.
Gumper, always a pleasure. Appreciate it. Good luck to you.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
Starts as a golden bear, but where you finish, that's untold. Because when the raw materials are put in the right hands, that's when you strike gold. It's good to be golden.
We are joined by tennis coach Shari Bucklin-Webber. And Shari, obviously, we've all been in this situation now for almost a year, which is hard to believe. What was it like for your teams in the spring when this all happened?
Yeah, definitely probably in the top 2 of my most memorable coaching moments at KU. We were scheduled to go on our spring break trip to Hilton Head in early March. And, at that point we were just starting to hear about the virus, mostly out on the West Coast. And, I kind of consider myself not just a coach, but a team mom too. I mean, I take the safety and the health of my players very seriously. And so before we left, I consulted our sports medicine department and asked for some guidance, things to do, things not to do, so forth. So they gave us some sanitation wipes and Purell and some other, suggestions about, some things. So the next morning, Coach Reagan and I greeted every player to come on the bus at 5:30 in the morning, and it's still dark and cold, and we greet each one of them at the bus with Purell, sanitation wipes, and instructions. And, they respectfully humored us every time we got off the bus on that 12-hour trip. We greeted them the same way, with the And, like I said, they respectfully humored us and, did it. So each day that we were there on the spring break trip, we would get more and more bad news about the virus, spreading and getting worse. And so by Wednesday, the day that we were supposed to leave, we had a match that morning. And during our match, everybody's phones are blowing up. Much more things were happening, and it was getting scarier. So I did prepare them that I thought that this could be, our last match of the spring. And I wanted to make sure that they didn't have any regrets after, and not realize that that could be their last match. So we had those conversations, and the women's team had a great match. We were at 2 different sites. So the women's team had a great match. They won 4-3. Last match on the court, comes down to the wire, and it was very exciting. So then we immediately meet the men's team at the bus to then go on our return trip home. And by now, everybody now is taking all this as seriously as Coach Reagan and I were from the beginning. And now they are greeting us at the bus for each sanitation welcome and greeting on the 12-hour trip home. So that's kind of, how our spring, kind of finished. I was never so happy to be able to deliver the players back to campus safely. And they all, then from then on, our season was canceled that next day, and they returned back to their home or whatever, and that's kind of how our spring season ended.
From that point, March 11th, March 12th, to where we are now, what have you been able to do with your teams?
Well, from that point right away, just a lot of texting, weekly calls, just to check in on them. Not just academically, but mentally, physically, emotionally. Just see what do they need, how are they doing, do they need anything. That was kind of to finish out that semester. And then the summer was sort of the same thing. And, we were in hopes of, being able to have a normal fall. And then word got out pretty quickly when they did, came back, that we weren't going to have any competitions for the fall, but we were hopeful of having practices. A lot of work over the summer between me and the administration, coming up with tons of safety protocols and making sure that we were following all the different guidelines. A lot of research, a lot of planning, and then we were finally able to get back on the courts for practice. I think it was mid-October. I'm not sure of the exact date. With limited hours and limited things that we were able to do. We had to wear masks during practices and conditioning, and that's a challenge. A lot of, myself included, we wear glasses on the court, so learning how those didn't fog up. But I have to say, what really impressed me most about all that was every single player really respected the protocols. I didn't have any issues with them asking why or not following the things. They did it. They were diligent, they were respectful, and even through all that, they still came to every practice that with a smile that was evident even with their masks on. So their attitudes just really impressed me.
Let's hope we can get back to some semblance of normal in the spring. And if that is the case, what are you most looking forward to?
Oh, seeing them more often. The Zoom meetings, the text, you can't always tell exactly how they're doing. And I really, want to know if they need something. Is there something I can do? So I think the in-person meetings, practices, that time in person is really important to see how everybody is doing. And when they're doing well, I get energy from them, and then it just keeps going. It's just cyclical. We kind of feed off each other then. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think the camaraderie, because of them having to face all these challenges, together, they've really developed a very cohesive camaraderie, faster and stronger than I've ever seen a team do that. So I'm anxious to see how, they use that camaraderie and what they've learned, and how, the new appreciation to be back on the court again and be in those competitions. I'm anxious to see how they put all that into play.
I want to circle back, Share, to a couple things you mentioned. A normal fall. Take me through what your year is like. What happens in the fall with your teams? What is the winter portion like? And then what happens in the spring when we're used to doing what we're normally used to doing?
Well, tennis is a little unique. We have a fall and a spring season. Our fall season does count. Those matches are not scrimmages. So typically in the fall, we will have, each team might have 3 or 4 regular matches, and then the individual conference championships. So that's what they missed out on this fall. Unfortunately, I think we had 3 or 4 weeks of practices. So hopefully, next fall we'll have that normalcy of that fall season. Then typically, a week before finals, we're shut down. We don't, they're getting ready for finals and really focusing on their academic ends of things. From the time that Thanksgiving rolls around till they come back on campus for the spring season, they're on their own. They're not, there's no practices, but, they're kind of we're checking in with each other to see how, is there anything they need? A lot of them are practicing at their own club facilities back home, doing their kind of own workouts. And then the spring season is brutal. That's sort of why we take off that time, in between the fall and spring. Spring season, it is a crazy 8 weeks, depending on weather. As soon as they get back on campus, we start with practices. And depending on if we can get out, we have to be in the field house practicing, or if we can get outside, we are taking any time outside that we can get. And then our first matches start with our spring break trip, the second week of March. And then it's, it could be 3-4 matches a week from then out until the end of April, depending on weather. So yeah, it's a whirlwind.
You also brought up conditioning, and obviously when you have them on the court, you can work on serves and volleys and forehands and backhands. What do they have to do off the court to stay in shape?
Well, a few years ago, I was lucky enough to run into somebody who was the assistant to a guy in Florida who does all the training for junior ITF players. And they were kind enough to share a lot of his new drills and kind of techniques. And I enjoy that. In fact, I tried that myself. I did that whole regiment myself before I tried it out on the team for that year. And I probably played the best tennis of, that summer because of that. So I knew it worked. So I actually took over the strengthening and conditioning segments this fall. I didn't want our strengthening and conditioning coach at Kutztown to be overwhelmed. And if I knew I could do it, I did run it by him to make sure, that he knew what we were doing and everything was okay. But I also wanted to be able to spend that time with them. I wanted to spend every allowed minute that I could with them this fall to keep tabs on them, to see if there was anything else they needed. Because like I said, in Zoom meetings and text, you can't always tell. So there's a lot of conditioning drills that they will do that they don't need, they don't need weights. They can do weights, but a lot of it is aerobic and balance and strengthening things, and strengthening their core. That's very specific to tennis. So now with, after this fall, they know exactly what they have to do, because I was doing it with them every chance we could this fall. So they have no excuses now. I don't either, though. That's the problem.
That is true. That is true. You're in the Berks County Tennis Hall of Fame, but you grew up in Columbus, Ohio. How did you first get interested in the game of tennis?
Well, I played all sports growing up, and I was a gymnast for, probably since I was 4. And my high school won the state gymnastics title routinely. And so I was in gymnastics, but it just didn't feel like as much of a team sport as I was looking for. And I also struggled with that sort of, being perfect mentality. I knew I wasn't going to be perfect, and I wanted a chance to be able to make up for my mistakes. So I switched over to tennis and basketball. And I think my mom might have been a little disappointed, but my dad was thrilled. So it was an interesting dinner conversation that night when I made the change over to those sports. But tennis, I really struggled with tennis. I was very little, so it took me a long time. But I think because I had to work so hard at it, I grew to love it, and I love what it reveals about a person on the court. I think you can hide a little bit in other sports, but in tennis, and it's brutal. If it's not, a day's not going your way, you can't call a sub. There's no timeouts. It can be brutal, but that's what I love about it.
What are the challenges for you in coaching two teams, one a men's team and one a women's team?
Well, it's interesting. I grew up between two brothers, so I sort of had more of that mentality of sports. So when I started coaching men's and women's, I coached both of them the same, and I wasn't having the success early on with the women's teams as I was with the men. So I was doing some research, and I came across a quote, and I can't remember if it was a coach from UCLA or USC, but it was probably 3 decades ago that he wrote this. And he said, he felt like men had to win to have fun, and women had to have fun to win. And it made me think, and so I did change our practices, women's practices mostly, a bit. And I think it really helped. We do a blend of conditioning, competitive drills, and technical drills, but I think my demeanor is a little different on the women's practices. And we will practice together probably once a week, because I do want to promote team camaraderie between the two teams. But there are definitely differences, so we have to honor, that those times that we can do our different drills, and have those differences. Give those differences a chance. So it's an interesting dynamic. I really enjoy it, but I do think it's important that they have time to have that camaraderie together too.
Before you came to Kutztown, you spent some time at Millersville, so you were familiar with Kutztown and the area. What do you like most about being the coach at Kutztown?
Oh, the tradition that is here, and how much longevity there is with the other coaches. If I have a question, I know somebody's going to know. I know, they've been very helpful, sharing their experiences. And I just love the balance that the whole school puts on the academics and the athletics. And my son, actually, my oldest son graduated from Kutztown in 2010, and he played on the baseball team. So he was a pitcher, and so I got to know a lot of the administration and the baseball coaching staff. And unfortunately, the sports medicine staff, because he did have some injuries. So I did get familiar with the school, first through that. And he did his research and knew more about Kutztown back then, even though I was coaching, than I did. So it's been kind of a neat way of learning different ways about Kutztown through, being a parent of a student, being a coach, being in the community. And also knowing some of the other sporting events that they've had. I've, attended, I helped out with some of the camps at, the tennis, through the tennis, that the university didn't sponsor, but that were on the campus. So I got to know a lot of the administration through that as well.
And finally, Shari, as you take a look at your programs, what are some of your goals in the next few years that you'd like to see your teams achieve?
Oh, our goal is always for each teams, always to make it to the conference championships. And I do feel that we have, we've done a little bit of this. The women's team, I think, is doing more of this. I do feel very confident, and I'm very happy with where both teams are now. we've got some strong new players that are here as freshmen or transfers for both sides. So I'm really excited to see how all that affects the success of this spring, hopefully. But I also think the camaraderie that they've built up through dealing with the recent challenges has really, like I said, really sparked the camaraderie. So I'm really anxious. I'd love to get back to the NCAAs within the next 5 years. And I think this team that I have right now, especially on the men's side, they're looking at getting back to the NCAAs probably in 2 to 3 years. The women haven't voiced that, but that is my goal for them as well.
Thank you so much for taking the time and filling us in on the program, and hopefully you're back out on the courts very soon.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you for your time.